did everything right. You built the career, or you're building it. You have people who love you, or something close enough to love. You have a roof, a routine, reasons to get up. By any measurable standard, your life is working. And yet, there is something underneath all of it that won't quiet down. Not loud enough to be a crisis, not visible enough to explain to anyone. Just a persistent, low hum of wrongness. A sense that you are living slightly beside yourself. That the person going through the motions is you, but not quite all of you. You've tried to logic your way out of it. You've told yourself you're being ungrateful, that other people have it worse, that this is just how adult life feels. And for a while, that works. Until it doesn't. Until the hum gets louder, or you wake up one morning and realize you've been numb for months without noticing. Here is what no productivity system, no career milestone, no relationship will tell you. The problem is not out there. The problem is that you have been running your entire life from one small room in a vast house, and you have never once opened the other doors. Carl Jung spent decades mapping what lies behind those doors. What he found was not what he expected. It was not chaos. It was not darkness for its own sake. It was intelligence. A vast, ancient, deeply personal intelligence that had been trying to reach you your entire life through your dreams, your symptoms, your gut feelings, your most irrational impulses, and that you had been systematically ignoring because no one ever told you it was worth listening to. Jung called this the unconscious, and he was very clear about what happens when you don't listen to it. By the end of this video, you will understand why your life can look right and feel empty at the same time. You will understand what the unconscious actually is, how it speaks, and what it costs you when you refuse to hear it. But I'll warn you now, what you're about to confront is not comfortable, because the real question isn't whether your unconscious is trying to communicate with you. It is. The question is whether you have the courage to stop pretending you can't hear it. You think you know yourself because you know your thoughts. That is the mistake. Jung was precise about this. What you call yourself, your opinions, your plans, your self-image, your reasons for doing what you do, is a thin layer of light floating on top of an ocean you have never looked into. The conscious mind is real, but it is not the majority. It is not even close to the majority. Below it lives everything that actually drives you, the pattern you keep repeating in relationships, even when you swore this time would be different. The career you chose because it felt safe, not because it called to you. The rage that comes out sideways at the wrong person at the wrong moment, because the real target was never named. The sadness that arrives on Sunday evenings for no reason you can identify. None of this is random. None of this is chemical imbalance or bad luck or character flaw. It is the unconscious, running its programs, whether you're paying attention or not. Jung observed something that modern psychology has spent decades trying to prove and still hasn't fully absorbed. Most of what you are is hidden from you. Not because you are broken, because that is how the psyche is built. Consciousness is the tool you use to navigate the surface of life. But the depths, your real values, your genuine desires, the wounds that shaped you, the forces that move you, those live somewhere else. Somewhere the ego cannot reach by simply deciding to look. The tragic irony is this: the more intelligent you are, the better you become at constructing explanations for why you do what you do. You build elaborate narratives, you justify, you rationalize, you become fluent in the language of reasons. You get very good at sounding like someone who understands themselves. And all the while, the actual cause of your behavior is operating one floor below, completely untouched by your analysis. In the Undiscovered Self, Jung made a point that should stop you cold. He wrote that what most people call self-knowledge is really just knowledge of their conscious ego, and that confusing the two is not a minor error. It is the central confusion of modern life. You measure your self-knowledge against what other people in your social circle know about themselves, and because everyone around you is equally blind, the blindness feels normal. It feels like insight. You are not the driver you think you are. You are, far more often, the passenger, watching your own life happen and constructing explanations for it after the fact. The decision was already made. The pattern was already in motion. The ego just arrived late and took credit. This is not an insult. It is the starting point, because you cannot change what you refuse to see. And what most people refuse to see is not some dark secret buried deep. It is simply the sheer size of what they don't know about themselves, and how loudly that unknown is already shaping everything. The question then becomes, if the unconscious is running so much of your life, how does it communicate? Because it does communicate, constantly. In a language most people were never taught to read, and have spent their whole lives dismissing as noise. That language is where we're going next. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The unconscious does not send emails. It does not leave you a clear message explaining what it needs, what it wants, or what you have been avoiding. It does not speak in the clean, linear language of the conscious mind. It never has. And this is precisely why most people dismiss it. Because when it does speak, it sounds like something else entirely. It sounds like a dream you almost remember. It sounds like a feeling in your chest that has no name and no obvious cause. It sounds like the inexplicable pull toward a person, a place, a decision that makes no rational sense, and that you talk yourself out of before noon. It sounds like the recurring image that keeps surfacing in your mind when you're tired, or alone, or honest. It sounds like the body tightening in a room where nothing is technically wrong. This is the language Jung dedicated his life to learning, and what he found was not primitive noise. It was not the chaos of an animal mind leaking through. It was a sophisticated symbolic system, older than language, older than culture, that the psyche uses to communicate what the ego is not yet ready to hear directly. Dreams were, for Jung, the most direct expression of this language. Not prophetic in the mystical sense, but honest in a way the waking mind almost never is. When you dream, the ego's defenses relax. The psyche stops performing, and what surfaces are images, figures, scenarios that carry real meaning. Not literal meaning, but symbolic meaning. The figure chasing you is not a stranger. The house with the locked room is not a house. The version of yourself doing something you would never do in waking life is not a mistake or a perversion. It is a message. It is the unconscious pointing at something you have refused to look at directly. But dreams are only one channel. Jung identified others. Synchronicities, those moments when an external event and an internal state collide in a way that feels impossibly significant, are not mere coincidence to be rationalized away. They are moments when the boundary between inner and outer becomes permeable, when the deeper layer of the psyche surfaces through the world itself. The book that falls open to the exact page you needed, the conversation that answers the question you hadn't spoken aloud. You have felt this. You called it coincidence and moved on. Jung would say you left the message unopened. Then there are the symptoms. The chronic tension in your shoulders that no massage ever fully resolves. The headaches that arrive before certain conversations. The exhaustion that descends not after hard work, but after you've spent a day being someone you're not. The body is not separate from the psyche. It is one of its loudest speakers. When the conscious mind refuses to process something, the unconscious often routes it through the body instead, and the body, unlike the ego, does not know how to lie. And finally, there are the impulses you dismiss before they finish forming. The sudden, irrational urge to change everything, the longing for something you can't name, the feeling, in the middle of a perfectly acceptable life, that you are betraying something essential in yourself, something you couldn't explain to anyone because it has no logical basis, because it lives below logic. Jung's point was not that you should act on every impulse or treat every dream as a divine instruction. His point was far more demanding than that. He was saying that these signals form a coherent conversation, and that you have been hanging up the phone every time the unconscious calls. The cost of that is not abstract. It is not philosophical. It accumulates in real ways, in real time, in the texture of your actual life. And that cost is what we need to look at directly. Because until you understand what it actually takes from you to keep ignoring this, you will keep ignoring it. The unconscious does not warn you once and walk away. It will whisper first, then speak. Then, if you keep not listening, it will find a way to make you stop. Most people only discover they have an unconscious when it has already started breaking things. Jung was unambiguous about this. When the signals are ignored long enough, the unconscious doesn't go quiet. It escalates. The manageable anxiety becomes something that wakes you at 3 in the morning with no identifiable cause. The pattern you kept repeating in relationships doesn't just repeat. It worsens, becomes more precise in the way it finds the same wound every time. The vague meaninglessness you kept pushing down with work and distraction stops responding to those treatments. This is not punishment. The unconscious is not retaliating against you. It is doing the only thing it can do, increasing the signal strength until the message gets through. Jung saw this in nearly every patient who walked through his door. The man who had built a perfect life and then, at 45, dismantled it in ways he couldn't explain. The person who kept sabotaging themselves at the exact moment success was within reach. Not out of fear, but because something deeper knew the success being pursued was the wrong one. That the life being built was not theirs. Depression, without a visible cause, is often this. Not sadness about something, but the absence of connection to something. To the deeper layer of yourself that carries your real values, your genuine direction. Anxiety that logic cannot resolve is often the ego sensing it is out of alignment with the self, without knowing how to name that or close the gap. And burnout is often not exhaustion from doing too much. It is exhaustion from doing too much of the wrong thing, while the real thing waits. The unconscious will protect you from the wrong life, even when the ego is fully committed to it. But the deepest price of silence is not suffering. It is estrangement. From yourself, from your own depth, from the sense that your life is actually yours. You can endure suffering. What is harder to endure is living as a stranger in your own existence, assembled for external approval, while the real version of you waits behind a wall you built and forgot you built. Jung spent decades watching people pay that price. And he spent an equal amount of time showing that the channel could be reopened, that it was never too late to start listening, only increasingly costly to keep refusing. What that dialogue actually looks like is exactly where we are going next. The unconscious is already speaking. The only question is whether you are willing to learn how to hear it. Jung was not a mystic, he was a clinician. And the practices he developed for establishing dialogue with the unconscious are not rituals or spiritual exercises. They are disciplined acts of attention, the kind of attention most people have never been taught to direct inward. The most direct channel is the dream. Not because dreams are prophetic, but because they are honest. When you sleep, the ego's defenses lower, and the psyche speaks without the filter of social performance or self-protection. Jung's approach to dreams was never to interpret them literally and never to force them into a predetermined symbolic dictionary. The method was to sit with the images and ask, what part of me does this figure represent? What is this scenario pointing at that I have been unwilling to look at directly? A recurring dream is not a glitch. It is the same message being resent because it hasn't been received yet. Then there is what Jung called active imagination, one of the most demanding and least understood of his techniques. You enter a state of relaxed attention. You call up a figure from a dream or an emotion you have been avoiding, your anger, your fear, your grief, and you dialogue with it consciously, not to defeat it, not to analyze it from a safe distance, to actually listen to what it has to say. You write the dialogue down. You let it surprise you. What emerges is often the thing you most needed to hear and most deeply did not want to. Pay attention to synchronicities. When a coincidence feels significant, when the world seems to answer a question you hadn't spoken aloud, don't rush to explain it away. Sit with it. Ask what message it might be carrying. Jung was not asking you to become superstitious. He was asking you to notice when the boundary between inner and outer becomes unusually thin, and to treat that as information rather than noise. Listen to your body. The tension that lives in a specific place, the exhaustion that arrives, not after effort, but after inauthenticity, the physical symptom that returns predictably in certain situations. The body is not separate from the psyche. It speaks when the mind won't. Ask it what it's trying to tell you, not metaphorically, but as a genuine practice. Sit with the sensation and ask, what emotion is living here? What truth am I not letting myself feel? And watch your projections. What you hate most intensely in other people is almost always something you carry yourself and have refused to claim. What you idealize in others is often something you have denied yourself permission to be. The charge, positive or negative, is the signal. When someone provokes a reaction in you that seems disproportionate, that disproportion is a map. It is pointing directly at something in you that is waiting to be integrated. None of this requires hours of daily practice or a Jungian analyst, though the latter can accelerate the process considerably for those willing to go deep. What it requires is something far more difficult and far more available. The willingness to take your inner life seriously. To stop treating your dreams as random noise, your intuitions as inconvenient, your symptoms as purely mechanical, your irrational impulses as embarrassments to be suppressed. The dialogue with the unconscious is not a technique you add to your routine. It is a fundamental reorientation of how you relate to yourself, and it cannot happen in isolation from the world that shaped you, the culture that trained you from the beginning to look everywhere except inward. That is the layer we need to examine next. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. This did not happen by accident. The disconnection you feel from your inner life, the difficulty trusting your intuition, the automatic dismissal of anything that can't be measured or justified, is not a personal failing. It is the predictable result of a culture that has spent centuries teaching you that the only valid form of knowing is rational, conscious, and externally verifiable. Everything else is weakness, superstition, self-indulgence. Jung saw this clearly, and he named it without softening it. In The Undiscovered Self, he argued that modern society had made a catastrophic wager, that by elevating scientific rationalism as the sole authority over human life, it could produce order, progress, meaning. What it produced instead was a civilization of people who were technically sophisticated and psychically starved. People who had gained enormous power over the external world and lost almost all contact with their internal one. The institution, the corporation, the algorithm, they all want the same thing from you. They want the part that shows up on time, performs predictably, produces measurable output, and does not ask inconvenient questions about whether any of this is actually meaningful. They have no use for your dreams. They have no category for your synchronicities. Your symptoms are inefficiencies to be managed. Your irrational impulses are liabilities to be suppressed. And so you learned. You learned early, and you learned well. You learned to lead with logic and apologize for feeling. You learned to call your intuitions just a feeling, the word just doing enormous damage in that sentence. You learned to treat the inner life as decoration at best, distraction at worst, something to attend to on weekends, in therapy once a week, or not at all. Jung watched this produce what he called a mass psychology, not in the political sense alone, but in the deepest psychological sense. When individuals lose contact with their own depths, they become eerily susceptible to whatever external force offers them certainty. The ideology, the brand, the movement, the influencer, anything that fills the vacuum left by the abandoned self, because the psyche cannot tolerate a void. If you do not fill it from within, something from outside will fill it for you, and it will not have your interests at heart. This is the inheritance you are working against, not a personal weakness, a systematic one. The culture did not set out to disconnect you from yourself, but that is what it achieved. And recognizing that is not an excuse to stop taking responsibility. It is the beginning of taking a different kind of responsibility. The kind that asks not just what you should do, but who you actually are beneath everything you were told to be. Because that question, who you actually are, is precisely what the unconscious has been trying to answer for you all along. And when you finally stop outsourcing that answer to the world around you and begin the real work of listening inward, something shifts, not immediately, not painlessly, but permanently. That shift is what we arrive at now. Here is the truth the whole video has been building toward. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing at life because you feel empty despite doing everything right. You are estranged from the deeper layer of yourself that knows what you actually need, what actually matters to you, what your life is actually for, and that estrangement is not permanent. But ending it requires something the culture will never ask of you, because the culture has no interest in what happens when you become whole. It requires you to stop being the person you were approved to be and start becoming the person you actually are. Jung called this individuation, not self-improvement, not optimization, not the relentless project of becoming a better functioning version of the persona you already built. Individuation is something far more radical and far more uncomfortable than any of that. It is the process of integrating everything, the parts you cultivated and the parts you buried, the strengths the world rewarded and the depths the world never asked about. It is becoming for the first time fully yourself. This does not happen all at once. It is not an event, it is a direction, a fundamental reorientation of where you look for answers, away from the noise outside and toward the quiet that most people spend their entire lives running from. The dreams you finally stop dismissing, the impulse you finally stop rationalizing away, the symptom you finally ask a real question of. These are not small gestures. They are the beginning of a completely different relationship with your own existence. And here is what Jung found in case after case across decades of this work. When people begin this dialogue in earnest, the emptiness does not disappear immediately, but it changes character. It stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like depth. The life does not instantly rearrange itself into perfect alignment, but decisions start carrying a different weight. Choices begin to feel like they belong to you. The sensation of living beside yourself, that persistent low hum of wrongness, starts to quiet. Not because the problems are solved, because you are finally, for the first time, in the right conversation. Your dreams are not random noise. They are the most honest thing about you. Your intuitions are not inconvenient feelings to be managed. They are intelligence that predates your education. Your symptoms are not malfunctions. They are messages from the part of you that refuse to be entirely silenced. The unconscious has been patient. It has been sending the same letters through different channels your entire life. The only question that remains, the one only you can answer, is whether you are finally ready to open them. If this video cracked something open in you, sit with that. Don't rush past it. Write down the dream you keep having. Notice the feeling you keep dismissing. Ask the question you have been afraid to ask yourself in silence. And if you want to keep going deeper, subscribe. This channel exists for the people who are done pretending the surface is enough. We'll be here when you're ready.